The emergency beacon flashed red across every communication device in the galaxy. Commander Jake Peterson sat in his small office aboard the civilian transport ship New Horizon when the message arrived. The Galactic Council of 7 Races was calling for an immediate assembly on Nexus Prime. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and read the message again. In 50 years of human membership in the galactic community, there had never been an emergency session. Jake walked down the narrow corridor to find his team. Lisa Martinez was reviewing trade agreements in the diplomatic quarters. She looked up when Jake entered, her dark hair falling across her face as she noticed his serious expression. Dr. Ryan Clark was in the science bay, studying samples from their last agricultural export mission. Colonel Amy Brooks was checking inventory in the cargo hold, making sure their modest supplies were properly stored. The New Horizon was not an impressive ship by galactic standards. It was small, slow, and carried basic equipment. Other species often joked that human ships looked like they were built from spare parts. The hull was patched in several places, and the engines made strange noises during hyperspace jumps. But it got them from place to place, and that was enough for their simple missions. Jake gathered his team in the main cabin. The space was cramped, with 4 chairs around a small table. Through the porthole, stars streaked past as they traveled. Toward Nexus Prime, Lisa poured coffee from their small supply, while Ryan adjusted his glasses nervously. Amy sat straight in her chair, her military training showing even in the relaxed setting. The journey took 3 days. During that time, they received more messages from the Council. Each one was more urgent than the last. Other species were arriving at Nexus Prime with large fleets and full diplomatic teams. The Craxi brought their massive warships, black metal vessels bristling with weapons. The Vorthan arrived in ships that seemed to bend light around them, their technology far beyond human understanding. The Mentari came in vessels that hummed with psychic energy. Jake felt small and insignificant compared to these powerful races. Humans had joined the galactic community as junior members. They provided food from their fertile worlds and basic manufactured goods. In return, they received protection and access to advanced technology. It was a fair trade, even if it meant being looked down upon by the other species. When they finally reached Nexus Prime, Jake was amazed by the size of the gathering. The massive space station was designed to hold meetings between the 7 races. It was shaped like a 7-pointed star, with each point belonging to one of the member species. The human section was the smallest, reflecting their status in the community. The New Horizon docked at the human bay. Jake and his team walked through corridors filled with aliens of every description. Craxi warriors stomped past in their heavy armor. Vorthan technicians floated by, their blue skin glowing softly. Mentari diplomats moved silently, their large eyes seeming to look right through the humans. The ancient Elderkin moved slowly on their many legs, while the aquatic depths traveled in mobile water tanks. The insectoid hive minds clicked and buzzed to each other, and the energy beings called the Luminous flickered like living light. The main council chamber was enormous. Each species had their own section, designed to accommodate their different needs. The human area consisted of 4 simple chairs in the back corner. Jake felt embarrassed by how small their delegation was compared to the others. The Craxi had brought 50 warriors and generals. The Vorthan had an entire team of scientists and engineers. Even the mysterious Luminous had sent more representatives than the humans. The council leader was an ancient Elderkin named Zakthol. His voice echoed through the chamber as he called the meeting to order. The translation devices built into each seat allowed everyone to understand, but Jake could hear the worry in the old alien's tone, even through the electronic voice. Zakthol began to speak about events at the edge of the galaxy. 3 weeks ago, long-range sensors had detected an unknown fleet approaching from outside their galaxy. The ships were unlike anything in the known databases. They moved in perfect formation and seemed to ignore all attempts at communication. The first contact had been a disaster. A Craxi patrol fleet had encountered the unknown ships near the outer rim. The Craxi commander had tried to establish communication. Men had attempted to show force when that failed. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. All 12 Craxi warships were destroyed without the unknown fleet taking a single casualty. The Council sent a larger force to investigate. This time, it was a combined fleet with Craxi warriors, Vorthan technology, and Mentari psychics. The battle was even worse. The unknown ships seemed to predict every move before it was made. They used weapons that went through shields, like they weren't there. The few survivors reported that their most advanced defenses were useless. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he listened. The other species in the galaxy were incredibly powerful compared to humans. If they couldn't fight these invaders, what hope did anyone have? The Craxi were famous throughout the galaxy for their military might. The Vorthan had technology that seemed like magic. The Mentari could read minds and predict the future. The Elderkin had millions of years of experience. Yet all of them had failed. Dr. Ryan Clark leaned forward in his chair. His scientific mind was working on the problem. He whispered to Jake that the energy readings from the battles didn't make sense. The weapons used by the invaders seemed to work on principles that defied known physics. Lisa Martinez was taking notes, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. The discussion continued for hours. Military leaders from each species shared what little information they had. The invaders moved faster than should be possible. Their ships were larger than anything in the galactic fleet. They showed no interest in communication or negotiation. They simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on. Then Zakthal turned his ancient gaze toward the human section. Jake felt suddenly exposed under those alien eyes. The council leader's voice carried across the chamber as he addressed the small human delegation. He explained that the council had reached a difficult decision. They needed someone to attempt communication with the invaders, someone who might be seen as non-threatening. Jake realized what was happening. The council wanted to use humans as messengers because they were weak. If the invaders killed the human delegation, it would be no great loss to the galactic community. Humans were expendable. They had no great technology to offer, no mighty fleets to contribute. They were simply farmers and manufacturers who happened to live on nice planets. The other species looked at the humans with a mixture of pity and hope. They needed someone to make contact with the invaders, but they didn't want to risk their own important people. Humans were perfect for the job. They were weak enough that the invaders might not see them as a threat, but they were still intelligent enough to carry a message. Jake stood up slowly. He looked around the massive chamber at all the powerful aliens who were depending on his small team. Lisa, Ryan, and Amy looked at him with trust in their eyes. They would follow his decision, whatever it was. The weight of responsibility felt crushing, but Jake knew they had no choice. He accepted the mission on behalf of humanity. The council would provide them with a better ship and more advanced communication equipment. They would travel to the edge of the galaxy and attempt to make contact with the mysterious invaders. If they succeeded, they might save the galaxy. If they failed, well, they were only humans. As the meeting ended, Jake felt the eyes of the galaxy upon him. He had volunteered his species to face an enemy that had destroyed the most powerful fleets in known space. But something deep inside him whispered that there was more to this story than anyone knew. The journey back to Earth took 5 days in the upgraded ship the Council had provided. Jake Peterson stared out at the familiar blue and green planet as they approached. From space, Earth looked peaceful and quiet, just another agricultural whirled among the thousands in human space. The orbital stations were small and simple, designed for processing food exports and basic manufacturing. Nothing about the planet suggested it held any secrets. Jake and his team landed at the primary spaceport in what used to be called North America. The building was functional, but not impressive, built from local materials and human engineering. Compared to the crystal spires of Vorthan cities or the floating platforms of the Mentari, human architecture looked primitive and basic, but it served its purpose, and that had always been enough for humans. President Karen Williams met them at the spaceport personally. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Jake had met her several times during his years as a diplomatic officer, but something felt different about her now. There was a tension in her movements, a weight to her words that hadn't been there before. The presidential transport took them to a building Jake had never seen before. It was located underground, beneath what appeared to be a simple government office complex. The elevator descended for what felt like several minutes, passing through multiple security checkpoints. Each level required different identification codes and biometric scans. Jake began to wonder just how deep this facility went. The elevator finally stopped at a level marked simply as DSC. The doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with armed guards wearing uniforms Jake didn't recognize. The walls were covered with displays showing star maps and tactical information. Officers moved with purpose through the halls, carrying data tablets and speaking in low, urgent voices. President Williams led them to a conference room that was larger than anything Jake had expected to find on Earth. The walls were covered with screens, showing real-time information from across human space. Star charts displayed shipping routes, colony locations, and what appeared to be military positions. But that was impossible. Humans didn't have military positions beyond basic planetary defense forces. The people waiting in the conference room were not who Jake expected to see. General Paul Davis was there, but he wasn't wearing the simple uniform Jake remembered from previous meetings. Instead, he wore a black uniform with rank insignia that suggested a much larger military organization than Jake knew existed. Admiral Susan Torres sat beside him, her uniform displaying service ribbons that indicated decades of active duty in operations. Jake had never heard of Dr. Elizabeth Grant, entered the room carrying a datapad that projected holographic displays. She was introduced as the head of something called the Terra Defense Initiative. Jake had never heard of this organization, despite his years working in human government. The woman moved with confidence and authority that suggested she commanded significant resources and personnel. President Williams took her seat at the head of the long table. Her expression was serious as she looked at Jake and his team. She began to speak about things that made Jake's head spin. For 30 years, she explained, Earth had been monitoring communications from outside the galaxy. They had detected signs of an approaching threat long before any other species knew it existed. The agricultural ships that Jake had helped coordinate were not what they seemed. Hidden within their cargo holds were advanced sensor arrays and communication equipment. Every human vessel that left Earth space was actually gathering intelligence on the other galactic species. They mapped military installations, studied weapon systems, and analyzed defensive capabilities. The galaxy's weakest member had been quietly cataloging the strengths and weaknesses of every other race. Dr. Grant activated her datapad, and the room filled with holographic displays. Jake saw detailed schematics of Craxi warships, complete with weak points and tactical vulnerabilities. Vorthan technology was analyzed down to the quantum level, with human scientists having found ways to counter their most advanced systems. Even the mysterious Mentari had been studied, their psychic abilities mapped and understood in ways that would have shocked them. The mining operations on distant asteroids were not mining operations at all. They were military research stations and weapons testing facilities. Human engineers had been developing new technologies in secret, advancing far beyond what they showed to the galactic community. The asteroid belt around Earth's sun contained more military hardware than most species had in their entire fleets. Admiral Torres stood and activated another display. Jake saw ships that looked nothing like the simple transports he knew humans used. These vessels were sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that seemed impossible for human technology to produce. The Admiral explained that humanity had been building a secret fleet for decades, preparing for a threat they knew would eventually come. General Davis showed tactical simulations that left Jake speechless. Human strategists had developed battle plans for fighting every known species in the galaxy, not because they wanted war, but because they understood that knowledge was the key to survival. They had studied alien tactics, identified patterns in their thinking, and found ways to exploit their overconfidence. The invaders approaching the galaxy were called the Devourers. Human deep space sensors had been tracking them for 3 decades, ever since they had consumed a neighboring galaxy. The enemy used quantum disruption weapons and dimensional phase technology, which explained why conventional defenses had failed so completely. But human scientists had been developing countermeasures, specifically designed to fight this kind of enemy. Jake felt his world turning upside down. Everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was wrong. They weren't weak farmers and manufacturers, struggling to survive among more advanced species. They were patient predators who had been studying their prey while appearing harmless and insignificant. The galaxy's most underestimated race had been preparing for war while everyone else lived in comfortable peace. Lisa Martinez asked the question that was burning in Jake's mind. Why had humanity hidden its true capabilities for so long? President William smiled grimly and explained that humans had learned important lessons from their own history. The strongest predator was not always the one with the biggest teeth. Sometimes it was better to let others think you were weak while you prepared for the moment when strength would be needed. Dr. Ryan Clark was examining the technical data with amazement. The quantum physics involved in the new weapon systems were decades ahead of anything he had studied. Human scientists had been making breakthrough discoveries in secret, advancing their understanding of the universe, while sharing only basic agricultural and manufacturing knowledge with their alien neighbors. Colonel Amy Brooks was studying the military organization charts with professional interest. The numbers were staggering. Humanity had built an entire military infrastructure in secret, with bases throughout human space and beyond. Personnel who officially worked as farmers, miners, and factory workers were actually soldiers and technicians, maintaining humanity's hidden defenses. President Williams stood and walked to the largest display screen. It showed a real-time map of the galaxy with the approaching Devourer fleet marked in red. She explained that the moment had finally come to reveal humanity's true nature. The species that had spent 50 years playing the role of harmless junior partners was about to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jake and his team would return to the Council and volunteer humanity's limited resources to help fight the invaders. They would reveal just enough of their true capabilities to shock the other species, but not enough to make them feel threatened. Humanity would step forward as the galaxy's protector, but they would do it in a way that made the other races grateful rather than afraid. As the meeting ended, Jake realized that he had never really known his own species. Humans weren't the weak, peaceful farmers that everyone believed them to be. They were the descendants of a planet that had produced countless wars, survivors who had learned to think strategically about every threat. They had taken those hard-earned lessons and applied them on a galactic scale, preparing for dangers that other species couldn't even imagine. The transport back to the spaceport was quiet. Jake, Lisa, Ryan, and Amy all processed what they had learned in their own ways. Tomorrow they would return to Nexus Prime, but this time they would be carrying humanity's true message to the galaxy. The age of hiding was over, and the Devourers were about to learn why Earth had produced the most dangerous species in known space. The ship that carried Jake Peterson and his team back to Nexus Prime was not the same modest transport they had used before. The Terra's Wrath was a vessel that made the Council's finest warships look like children's toys. Its hull was a dark metal that seemed to absorb light, covered with sensor arrays and weapon systems that defied easy classification. The ship moved through hyperspace with a smoothness that suggested engineering far beyond what the galaxy expected from humans. Captain Steve Morrison commanded the Terra's Wrath with quiet efficiency. His crew moved through their duties with precision that impressed even Colonel Amy Brooks, and she had seen the best military units Earth had to offer. These weren't the simple farmers and factory workers that other species expected humans to be. These were professionals who had trained for decades in secret, preparing for a war the galaxy didn't know was coming. Jake stood on the bridge as they approached Nexus Prime. Through the main view screen, he could see the massive fleets gathered around the space station. Craxi battle cruisers formed defensive formations, their weapons charged and ready. Vorthan science vessels hummed with energy as their crews worked to develop new defensive technologies. The combined might of 6 galactic civilizations floated in space, preparing for an enemy they didn't understand. The communications officer looked up from her station. The Nexus Prime traffic control was demanding identification and requesting that the unknown human vessel submit to inspection. Captain Morrison smiled grimly and nodded to his communications specialist. The response they sent back was brief and direct. This was a human diplomatic vessel, operating under Council authority, and it would dock at the human section immediately. The reaction from the other fleets was immediate. Sensors locked on to the Terra's Wrath, analyzing its hull composition and energy output. Jake could imagine the confusion in the alien command centers as their computers tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The readings would show a ship that was impossibly advanced for human technology, armed with weapons that shouldn't exist in their databases. The docking process drew crowds of alien observers. Craxi warriors gathered at observation windows, their fierce expressions showing confusion and concern. Vorthan technicians floated nearby, their instruments working overtime to scan the mysterious human vessel. Even the normally aloof Mentari seemed interested, their large eyes fixed on the ship that had appeared from nowhere. Jake and his team walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime with new confidence. Their escort was no longer just Colonel Hamey Brooks. Captain Morrison had assigned a full security detail, men and women who moved with the deadly grace of professional soldiers. Other species stepped aside as the humans passed, uncertain how to react to this sudden change in their former agricultural partners. The council chamber felt different when they entered. The same 7-pointed star design dominated the room, but now the human section didn't seem quite so small and insignificant. Jake took his place at the speaker's podium with new authority, while Lisa, Ryan, and Amy arranged themselves behind him. The data displays they carried contained information that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. Zach Thole called the emergency session to order, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber. The other council members looked toward the human delegation with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. They had expected the same small group of humble diplomats who had left just days before. Instead, they were seeing humans who carried themselves like conquerors. Began his presentation by thanking the council for their confidence in humanity's diplomatic abilities. Then he activated the first data display, and the mood in the chamber shifted dramatically. The holographic projection showed detailed tactical analysis of the Devourer fleet, complete with weapon specifications and tactical doctrine. The information was far more complete than anything the other species had been able to gather Dr. Ryan Clark, stepped forward to explain the technical details. His voice was steady and confident as he described the quantum disruption weapons and dimensional phase technology that the invaders used. But more importantly, he explained how these weapons worked and why the conventional defenses of the galactic races had failed so completely. The Devourers fought using principles that the galaxy's military leaders had never encountered. The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers and urgent conversations. The Krasi military commander stood up, his massive frame towering over his seat. He demanded to know how humans had obtained such detailed information about the enemy. Jake's answer was simple and devastating. Humanity had been monitoring extragalactic communications for 30 years, ever since they had detected the first signs of the approaching threat. Lisa Martinez activated the next display, showing the galaxy's military leaders something that left them speechless. It was a complete analysis of every major battle the council races had fought in the past 50 years. Human observers had recorded tactics, weapon effectiveness, and strategic thinking patterns. The galaxy's weakest member had been studying. Everyone else with the dedication of natural predators. The Vorthan delegation began talking excitedly among themselves, their blue skin glowing brighter as their emotions intensified. Their most advanced technologies were displayed on the human charts, analyzed down to the quantum level. Humans had not only understood Vorthan science, they had found ways to improve it and counter it. The Mentari representative stood slowly, her large eyes fixed on Jake with an expression of growing realization. She spoke in a voice that carried psychic undertones, asking how humans had shielded their thoughts from Mentari scanning. The answer came from Colonel Amy Brooks, who explained that humanity had developed mental discipline techniques specifically designed to counter psychic intrusion. Jake activated the most shocking display of all. It showed the real human fleet, hidden in asteroid fields and nebulas throughout human space. Hundreds of ships that rivaled the best vessels of any galactic race, armed with weapons that incorporated the best features of all known technologies, plus innovations that were purely human. The galaxy's farmers and manufacturers had built a military force that could challenge any species in known space. The Elderkin Council members spoke for the first time, her ancient voice filled with something that might have been respect or fear. She asked why humanity had hidden its true capabilities for so long. Jake's answer was delivered with quiet confidence that carried across the silent chamber. Humans had learned from their own history that the most successful predators were those who remained hidden until the moment to strike arrived. Captain Morrison was invited to address the council about human military doctrine. His presentation was brief and devastating. Human strategists had developed battle plans for defeating every known species in the galaxy, not because they sought conquest, but because they understood that knowledge of your neighbor's weaknesses was essential for survival. The galaxy's most underestimated race had been preparing for war while everyone else enjoyed peace. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The species that had provided food and basic manufactured goods for 50 years were actually the most dangerous military force in known space. They had watched and learned while others grew complacent, building strength in secret while appearing weak and harmless. The Kraxi commander asked the question that was on everyone's mind. If humans were so powerful, why reveal themselves now? Jake's answer was simple. The Devourers represented a threat to all galactic civilization. Humanity had spent decades preparing to fight this specific enemy, and now it was time to protect. The galaxy they had made their home. Dr. Grant's technical presentation showed weapons and defenses specifically designed to counter Devourer technology. Human scientists had been working on these problems for 30 years, ever since they had first detected the approaching invasion. The quantum disruption fields and dimensional phase weapons that had devastated the Council fleets would be useless against humanity's new defensive systems. The The mood in the chamber shifted from shock to hope as the Nitazi council members realized what they were being offered. The galaxy's secret apex predator was volunteering to defend the civilization that had unknowingly sheltered them. Humanity was revealing its true nature not to conquer, but to protect. Jake concluded his presentation by offering humanity's full military support in the coming war. The species that had hidden in plain sight for 50 years was ready to step forward as the galaxy's defender. The council would learn what it meant to have Earth's children fighting on their side. As the session ended, Jake could see the mixture of fear and gratitude in the alien faces around him. They had thought they were dealing with harmless farmers. Instead, they had discovered they were sharing the galaxy with sleeping giants who had chosen to dream of peace while preparing for the war they knew must come. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The age of hiding was over, and the real war was about to begin. The fortress world of Corvallis had stood unconquered for over 1,000 years. Its massive defense platforms and overlapping shield networks had turned back every enemy that had ever dared to approach. The planet's surface was covered with weapons installations, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. If any world in the galaxy could stop the Devourers, it would be KOR. Valis. Admiral Susan Torres stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the combined fleets of 6 galactic civilizations take their positions around the fortress world. Craxi battle cruisers formed the front line, their massive weapons charged and ready. Behind them, Vorthan science vessels prepared their most advanced defensive technologies. Mentari psychic ships attempted to create mental barriers against the approaching enemy. The human fleet remained hidden in the outer system, concealed within an asteroid field that masked their sensor signatures. Jake Peterson stood beside Admiral Torres, watching the tactical displays that showed the positions of both friendly and enemy forces. The Devourer fleet was less than 6 hours away, and the galaxy was about to learn what real warfare looked like. Captain Steve Morrison commanded the forward reconnaissance squadron from his ship Terra's Wrath. His orders were to observe the initial engagement and report back to the main human fleet. The other species expected humanity to stay in the rear, providing support and evacuation services for their agricultural allies. They had no idea that the most dangerous predators in the galaxy were about to join the hunt. The Devourers arrived exactly when human calculations predicted they would. Their ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, moving with mechanical precision toward the fortress world. Each vessel was larger than the biggest council warship, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light and sensor beams. They made no attempt to communicate, no gestures toward diplomacy or negotiation. The first attack came from the Crassi fleet. Hundreds of plasma cannons fired simultaneously, filling space with deadly energy. The barrage should have destroyed any known ship design, but the Devourer vessels barely seemed to notice. Their dimensional phase technology allowed the energy beams to pass through their hulls as if they weren't really there. The Vorthan response was more sophisticated. Their quantum torpedoes used advanced physics to bypass conventional defenses, while their energy shields created barriers that should have been impenetrable. But the Devourers had fought this kind of enemy before. Their quantum disruption weapons tore through Vorthan technology like paper, leaving the blue-skinned aliens, most advanced ships, helpless and dying. The Mentari tried to use their psychic abilities to confuse and disorient the enemy. Their mental attacks had never failed against any known species, capable of driving entire crews insane or forcing them to turn their weapons on each other. But the Devourers' minds were alien beyond comprehension, structured in ways that made psychic contact impossible. Within the first hour of battle, the Council forces were being systematically destroyed. The fortress world's massive defense platforms fired continuously, but their weapons had no effect on the enemy ships. The overlapping shield networks that had protected Corvallis for a millennium were being stripped away layer by layer. Jake watched the destruction with growing anger. These were the species that had become humanity's neighbors and trading partners over the past 50 years. They weren't perfect, and they had often looked down on humans as inferior, but they were part of the galactic community that Earth had chosen to protect. The Devourers were destroying civilizations that had taken millions of years to develop. Admiral Torres gave the order that changed everything. The human fleet dropped their concealment and emerged from the asteroid field at full battle speed. The USS Liberty led the charge, followed by the USS Defiance, USS Vengeance, and dozens of other ships that shouldn't have existed according to galactic records. Each vessel was armed with weapons, specifically designed to fight enemies like the Devours. The first human salvo was devastating. Gravitational weapons created crushing fields that disrupted the enemy's dimensional phase technology. Quantum torpedoes bypassed their exotic defenses and struck at the fundamental structure of their ships. Most importantly, probability disruption fields made it impossible for the Devourers to predict human tactics or movements. Lieutenant Commander Tony Rivera led Hurricane Squadron in the first fighter attack against Devourer capital ships. His pilots moved through space in ways that seemed to defy physics, using three-dimensional thinking that confused enemies who were used to fighting on flat battle planes. The human fighters struck like angry wasps, too small and fast for the massive enemy ships to target effectively. Captain Morrison brought Terra's wrath directly into the enemy formation, his ship's exotic weapons tearing through Devourer hulls that had seemed invulnerable moments before. His crew worked with mechanical precision, each person performing their duties with the skill that came from decades of secret training. These weren't farmers and factory workers. These were professional warriors who had been preparing for this exact battle. The tide of the engagement began to turn as more human ships joined the fight. The USS Thunder brought its experimental temporal weapons online, creating fields where time moved differently and enemy ships found themselves trapped in slow motion. The USS Storm used quantum entanglement technology to appear in multiple locations simultaneously, confusing Devourer targeting systems. But the real shock came when the Devourers began to retreat. For the first time in their expansion across multiple galaxies, they had encountered an enemy that not only matched their technology, but exceeded their tactical capabilities. The invaders who had destroyed civilizations without taking casualties were being systematically hunted down by human warships. The Council fleets could only watch in amazement as humanity demonstrated what real naval warfare looked like. Human ships moved in formations that seemed chaotic, but were actually mathematically precise, creating overlapping fields of fire that left no escape routes for the enemy. Human tactics incorporated lessons learned from thousands of years of warfare on Earth, adapted for use in three-dimensional space combat. The Kranzi military commander opened a direct communication channel to Admiral Torres. His voice carried a mixture of respect and fear as he asked how humans had developed such advanced combat capabilities. The Admiral's response was brief and devastating. Humanity had been preparing for this war since they first detected the Devourer threat 30 years ago. Dr. Ryan Clark monitored the battle from the USS Liberty's science station. His instruments showed that human weapons were not just defeating the enemy, they were doing it efficiently and systematically. The Devourers' quantum disruption technology was being countered by humanity's probability fields. Their dimensional phase capabilities were being negated by gravitational weapons that forced them back into normal space. The battle for Corvallis lasted 18 hours. When it ended, over half the Devourer fleet had been destroyed or forced to retreat. The Fortress World's defenders had been saved by the intervention of the species they had considered their weakest allies. The galaxy's farmers and manufacturers had proven themselves to be the most effective military force in known space. As the human fleet regrouped around Corvallis, Jake could see the reactions from the surviving council ships. Alien crews stared at the human vessels with expressions of awe and terror. They had witnessed something impossible. The race they had looked down upon for 50 years had just saved their civilization from destruction. Admiral Torres received congratulations from military leaders across the galaxy, but Jake could hear the uncertainty in their voices. They were grateful for humanity's intervention, but they were also afraid of what it meant. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically, and they didn't know what humans would do with their newfound dominance. The answer came in the form of a message broadcast on all frequencies. President Karen Williams addressed the galaxy from Earth, her words carrying the authority of a species that had just proven its superiority in battle. Humanity had no interest in conquest or domination. They sought only to protect the galactic community that had become their home, but the Devourers had sent a message of their own. The retreating ships broadcast on frequencies that only Earth's deep space monitoring stations could decode. The alien text was brief and direct. They had finally found worthy opponents, and they wanted to negotiate. The galaxy's apex predator had met another apex predator, and both sides recognized the futility of total war. As the immediate crisis passed, Jake realized that everything had changed. Humanity could never again pretend to be simple farmers and manufacturers. They had revealed their true nature to the galaxy, and there would be no going back to the old deception. The sleeping giants had awakened, and the universe would never be the same. The council chamber on Nexus Prime had never seen a gathering like this one. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy filled the vast space, but all eyes were focused on the human section. President Karen Williams sat where Commander Jake Peterson had once occupied a small corner, her presence commanding attention from beings who had ruled star systems for millions of years. The chamber itself had been restructured to accommodate the new reality. The human section was no longer a small collection of chairs in the back corner. Instead, it occupied a position of prominence equal to the other major powers. The seven-pointed star design of the chamber had been modified to reflect humanity's true status in the galactic community. Jake stood beside the president, wearing the uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps with new rank insignia that reflected his role in the revelation. Lisa Martinez carried data tablets containing information that would reshape interstellar law and treaty obligations. Dr. Ryan Clark had scientific reports that proved human technology was decades ahead of anything the galaxy had previously seen. General Paul Davis entered the chamber wearing the full dress uniform of the Terra Defense Command. His chest was covered with service ribbons that told the story of humanity's secret military operations over the past 50 years. Behind him walked Admiral Susan Torres, her uniform displaying decorations from battles that the galaxy was only now learning had taken place. The Craxi delegation occupied their traditional position, but their war chief Brandon Steele looked at the humans with new respect. His species had built their entire culture around military strength and conquest, yet they had been outfought by beings they had considered agricultural specialists. The greatest warriors in the galaxy had learned humility from Earth's children. The Vorthan representatives floated in their anti-gravity fields, their blue skin dim with what might have been embarrassment. Their most advanced technologies had been analyzed and surpassed by a species they had considered primitive. The beings who prided themselves on scientific advancement had discovered they were students, not teachers, in the presence of human innovation. The Mentari delegation sat in perfect silence, their large eyes reflecting emotions that their psychic abilities couldn't hide. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered minds they couldn't read or influence. Humanity's mental disciplines were more sophisticated than anything they had developed in millions of years of evolution. Zackthul called the assembly to order, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber with new undertones of respect. The Elderkin had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, but they had never seen anything like humanity's revelation. In their million years of existence, they had never encountered a species capable of such patient deception and strategic planning. President Williams stood to address the assembly, her words carrying the weight of a civilization that had just proven its dominance. She began by acknowledging the shock and fear that her revelation had caused among the galactic community. Humanity understood that their deception had shaken the foundations of interstellar politics and diplomacy, but the president explained that humanity's actions had been driven by necessity, not malice. Earth's history was filled with examples of civilizations that had been destroyed because they appeared weak to stronger neighbors. Humans had applied those lessons on a galactic scale, choosing to appear harmless while building the strength necessary to protect themselves and their allies. Dr. Elizabeth Grant presented the technical evidence that supported humanity's claims. For 30 years, Earth scientists had been monitoring extragalactic communications and detecting signs of the Devourer threat. The approaching invasion had been predicted and prepared for, while other species remained unaware of the danger. Approaching their galaxy. The deep space monitoring stations that humanity had built in secret were more advanced than anything the Vorthan had developed. Human sensor technology could detect quantum fluctuations across interstellar distances, allowing them to track enemy movements and predict their tactics. The galaxy's supposedly primitive species had been watching the universe with eyes that saw farther than anyone else's. General Davis revealed the true scope of humanity's military preparations. The Terra Defense Command had been building fleets and training personnel for decades, creating a military force specifically designed to fight enemies like the Devourers. Every human colony world contained hidden installations and weapons caches. Every civilian transport ship carried concealed military equipment. The asteroid mining operations that had seemed so typical of human expansion were actually fortress complexes armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The agricultural stations that had provided food for the galactic community were manufacturing centers producing military equipment on a scale that dwarfed the production capabilities of most species. Admiral Torres explained humanity's tactical doctrine to the assembled military leaders. Human strategists had studied every known form of warfare and developed countermeasures for every possible threat. They had analyzed the psychology of different species, identified their tactical preferences, and created battle plans that exploited their weaknesses. The revelation that shocked the Council most was the extent of humanity's intelligence network. Every human diplomat, trader, and colonial administrator had been gathering information about their alien neighbors. The galaxy's weakest member had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence. Operation in Galactic History. Jake activated a display that showed the current state of the Devourer fleet. The enemy ships that had retreated from Corvallis were regrouping at the galaxy's edge, but they were no longer advancing. For the first time in their expansion across multiple galaxies, the Devourers had encountered an enemy that could match their capabilities. Communication that had arrived from the Devourer fleet was unprecedented. The aliens who had never attempted diplomacy with any species were requesting negotiations with humanity. They had recognized Earth's children as equals and wanted to establish boundaries rather than continue a war that neither side could win decisively. President Williams revealed humanity's response to the Devourer communication. Earth was willing to negotiate, but only as representatives of the entire galactic community. Humanity would not make separate peace with an enemy that threatened their adopted home and neighbors. The species that had hidden its strength for 50 years was using that strength to protect others. The Cressy war chief stood to address the assembly, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. He acknowledged that his species had been wrong about humanity's capabilities and intentions. The greatest warriors in the galaxy requested permission to learn from Earth's military experts, recognizing that human tactical thinking was superior to their own. The Vorthan chief scientist made a similar request regarding technology sharing. Their advanced physics had been surpassed by human innovations, and they wanted to understand how Earth scientists had achieved such breakthroughs. The galaxy's most sophisticated technologists were asking to become students of human engineering. Even the proud Mentari admitted that humanity's mental disciplines were more advanced than their natural psychic abilities. They requested training in the techniques that had allowed humans to shield their thoughts and resist psychic influence. The galaxy's premier telepaths wanted to learn from minds they couldn't read. President Williams announced the formation of the Galactic Defense Alliance, with Earth serving as the coordinating authority. Humanity would share its advanced technologies and tactical knowledge with all species willing to contribute to the common defense. The galaxy's former weakest member was offering to become its protector and teacher. The new alliance would be based on mutual respect and cooperation, rather than the old system of superior and inferior races. Humanity's revelation had proven that appearances could be deceiving, and that every species had something valuable to contribute. The galaxy would be stronger when all its members worked together as equals. The Council voted unanimously to accept humanity's leadership in the coming negotiations with the Devourers. The species that had spent 50 years studying galactic politics from the shadows was the obvious choice to represent everyone's interests. Earth's diplomats understood their neighbors better than anyone else possibly could. As the assembly concluded, Jake reflected on how completely everything had changed. The small human delegation that had once occupied a corner of the chamber was now the center of galactic attention. The species that had provided food and basic goods had become the galaxy's military leaders and technological innovators. The journey back to Earth aboard Terra's Wrath was different from any trip Jake had taken before. The ship was no longer disguised as a simple transport vessel. It flew openly as a warship of the Terran fleet, its weapons and sensors active and undisguised. Other species' ships moved respectfully aside as the human vessel passed. President Williams stood on the bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen. The blue and green planet looked the same as always, but everything about its place in the galaxy had changed. The home of humanity was no longer a backwater agricultural world. It was the capital of a new kind of galactic civilization.